This video is sponsored by my childhood dog, Rudy.
I can help you without using witchcraft, pills, and molestation, but it won't be easy.
Okay, so before anything else, I want to say that by choosing to watch this video, you, yes you, the viewer, have shown yourself to be a scholar and a person of a kind disposition. Because it's so easy to just click on a review of an episode that we all like and lose ourselves in that highly specific discourse, but to seek out a video that presents a general discussion and reflection on the season as a whole, well, to me that's something to take note of, so good for you, really, I am quite impressed. However, I should also prep you by saying that this won't just be an exploration of the season itself, but also a reflection on my performance as a reviewer and how I think I could potentially improve in the future.
That's it! That's it! Yeah, that's it!
So if we think all the way back to how my last season retrospect went, I compared the first season of King of the Hill to Toshiro from the anime Bleach, because it's the shortest member of the bunch, you get it? And so this time I will continue that trend by saying, if season 2 were a captain of the Gotei 13, it is definitely Kenpachi Zaraki. And why do I make that comparison, you ask? Well, because holy shit, this thing is confrontational and outrageous. There are just so many dangerous situations, villains, existential threats, and, as if all that weren't enough, the possibility of reputational and social destruction, and even moments of outright death. I think most people would probably point to the Megalomart explosion as the height of the season's doom and gloom, and while it certainly does present a very powerful feeling of dread, let us not forget that Hank also took the full force of a tornado to the face and saw the Grim Reaper himself.
I didn't mean to curse my wife to hell.
Hi there. I mean, come on, that's like bordering on The Simpsons level of absurdity. And much like the early days of The Simpsons, King of the Hill's second season gives us a bunch of one-off characters who present this sort of like villain of the week structure. So let's think about it. We've got Professor Arrowhead, Leanne, Junie, Harper, Mr. Holloway, Vickers, and for people who weren't moved by my attempts at looking at these last two people from a more sympathetic viewpoint, Leon Petard and Kane Skredeberg. Now, in the case of Mr. Skredeberg, I can definitely understand why people still find him, like, unappealing. My review of his episode was definitely more of a, like, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, a thought experiment, an exercise in being the devil's advocate. I thought that was a more interesting way to do the episode, rather than just saying, like, this dude's a little snot goblin, I hate him, just like every other reviewer would probably say, so I took the more difficult path of looking at the whole paintball situation from Kane's perspective, which, had mixed results. And even though I thought I made it pretty clear in the episode that I was arguing for Kane's innocence in jest, I still got some people saying stuff like, oh, how dare you try to give this punk some leniency, can't you see what a bad person he is, reviewed to death, I can't believe you fumbled this review so bad, unsubbed, unsucked, unfucked, meh. But you know, that's just the risk you take when you do a video in an unconventional way. Sometimes people aren't gonna get or connect or appreciate what you're trying to do, meaning that the more expected style of script is the safer and smarter option instead of needlessly complicating your perspective, which can make things challenging for some people to find enjoyable. Writing the review in that way is definitely a risk, one that some people will find pays off and, you know, they'll think like, oh, that was so entertaining and like a really fresh way to go, but others will say like, wow, that really just didn't land for me, and that's okay. Such is life, you know, que sera, sera, we learn by doing. However, I do want to say that my Leon argument was genuine. It was coming from a real genuine place of, like, sympathy, because I still think that Leon was making an honest attempt at getting his life back in order, and I wouldn't consider him a traditional style of, like, sitcom bad guy. Like, yes, he'd been going to rehab centers before, and yes, they failed to help him in the long term, but I really think he was going to try there, or at least that Twig Boy probably would have kept him on the, like, the straight and narrow. Imagine having Twig Boy as your sponsor. That guy would not let you backslide at all. Maybe that's what that episode needed to have. It needed to show us like Twig Boy really being on Leon's case and sort of propping him up. I think that would have helped Twig Boy's sort of reputation in the long term if he really showed like he does care. He really does. I mean, he came back from LA or whatever to help like drug addicts sort of have their advocate, you know, so I think that Twig Boy really would have helped Leon in the long term and maybe would have been the thing that really kept him off of drugs.
Hello, Mr. Hill. I came as quick as I could. From your message, it sounded as if you'd become the victim of some kind of discrimination.
And as for the actual review itself, I did have to use a bit of my imagination to describe and connect with what Leon was going through, as I have not had the personal experience of drug addiction or living with someone with such a problem. And when you write from a position of ignorance like that, those with more informed perspectives, those who've actually lived that life, are going to call you out. They're going to say like, hey, you said this when really it's actually like this, which is why I think the dislike ratio on that video was so high, about 5 times higher than normal. Not that dislikes on YouTube matter much these days anyway. That whole feature is kind of like useless, but whatever. I guess YouTube wants to keep it around still. But yes, people more experienced with drugs and drug addicts and clinics than me pointed out the existence of speedballing, which is when people will take both upper and downer drugs at the same time, while I erroneously claimed that most addicts will typically seek out one primary effect, either a relaxant or a stimulant, which is definitely something that I got wrong. Those same people also drew upon their experiences with addicts to argue that Leon deserved what he got and that he was undeserving of my sympathy, which is a valid perspective, even if it's one that I don't necessarily agree with. And you know, Season 2 in general really gave me a bunch of experience with being wrong and getting a lot of comments that really pulled apart the points I was making. And I'm not even necessarily talking about like mean or cruel comments, like those don't even matter. Those just wash off my back like nothing. You kinda can't put videos up on YouTube if you're not prepared to take sort of like borderline abuse from some people out there. Like, you could put out anything. You could put out like cooking videos where you don't even show your face and you're just showing your hands, and people would say like, I don't know, you've been making these cooking videos for 20 years and I can kind of see you starting to age on the back of your hand. It's a little bit more wrinkled than I remember, so if you could just sort of like fix that, I would really appreciate it. Like, that kind of stuff is so out of pocket, but rather I'm talking about the comments that elevate the discussion beyond even where I am, which can be quite intimidating. The comments that sort of interrogate like, ooh, why are you making this point when you have to consider this, this, and this? Like, that's a little bit, again, quite intimidating. And there aren't even that many of those sort of like super deep comments, as the majority of folks out there are mostly just, you know, looking for new perspectives or background noises or whatever. But those like really insightful comments that point out the flaws in my script or editing, they really do stick with me, especially if I agree with their points and go like, oh yeah, why did I say it like that? Like, I really appreciate those comments, but man, there's sort of like this thing where, you know, I've been a student for the majority of my life, and getting comments like that sort of does feel like teacher feedback, and I sort of go like, like, why did I make that mistake? You know, it's sort of that mistake-based sort of feedback that really kind of sticks with you.
What do you think would happen if this know-it-all found a fake artifact and thought it was real? What would Peggy think of him then, huh?
I mainly just know about possums.
And even with all of that to consider, I would still say that the overall experience was really positive, but I'm sort of happy to have this season behind me, you know? If I were the kind of YouTuber who could just pick and choose the videos that I make and say, oh, I want to do this one, and oh, this is a mean one, I'll do this one, then with all of the options sort of available to me, I may have shied away from doing some of these episodes as they're kind of really tough or mean or whatever, but as is my burden, as the structure that I've set up for myself, I'm going through the show chronologically, which means I have to take everything head on, even if some of these episodes present subjects that aren't in my wheelhouse of knowledge. Oh, and one last thing on the topic of drugs. I saw some people take note of this bit of dialogue.
You're in school, you've got a righteous Christian puppet show, you're always so very clean.
Some have suggested that Peggy is using the term clean to refer to Luan not using drugs anymore, which, I gotta say, that argument feels a little weak to me for a few reasons. First, Luan has never shown any inclination towards drug use. I mean, come on guys, we all saw how strong of a stance she took against the Hill's smoking habit. She caged them in like animals. Does that seem like the kind of person who would have a lax attitude about drugs? I don't think so. Perhaps we could say that she's overcompensating and taking an overly defensive position where even something as simple as a cigarette gets her mad, but that is far too speculative for me to find even remotely plausible. At that point, we're really beginning to stretch the interpretation of the episode's content, which is fine for the purposes of pure speculation or extremely alternative interpretations, but it's not something that I really want to bring into my video reviews, as it's a little irrelevant, and I already have a really bad habit of bringing up a lot of irrelevant things in my videos. More notably though, the phrasing that Peggy uses here doesn't really line up with how you'd expect to use the word clean in this supposed context. For example, you wouldn't say to Leon, you've finally gotten very clean, or you're clean, very clean, not just regular clean, good. Because very is a word that is used to heighten a descriptor. You can say, for example, that your arm is very clean because there are indeed levels of cleanliness, but you can't be like kinda on drugs or super not on drugs because you either are or you aren't. You know, it's a one or the other status, which means that using the word very here is a bit nonsensical, and therefore is definitely not the way that Peggy is intending to use the word clean. But see, these are the kind of conversations that Season 2 brings out. It asks us to take stances on who's right and who's wrong, begs us to explain how we interpret the dialogue and intent behind character actions, and forces us to ask ourselves what we would do in such tough situations. Like, did Hank handle Bobby's fashion model career well or not? Was Bobby actually okay with getting second in the shooting competition? And should Santa Anna's leg be returned to Mexico in exchange for a driver's license? These questions serve to define the characters and, in a very real way, to define ourselves. I think this is facilitated by the season rarely hitting us over the head with overwhelming answers as to which character or interpretation is in the right, typically giving the resolutions enough nuance or different perspectives to make it feel like there are other ways of viewing these conflicts, as opposed to taking a very straightforward, like, here's the winning side and here's the losing side style of resolution, you know?
Look at him explode. That's my boy.
That's our boy. That's our Jeffrey.
This more hands-off and non-judgmental approach to the show lets the main characters make mistakes without straight up condemning them. For example, when Hank chooses the Super Bowl party over helping Luan with her manger babies, it is Peggy who gets him to see how much he cares about Luan and how much Luan is suffering without him, which makes it feel like Hank is coming to naturally understand the consequences of his actions from a natural point of view, but gives us the wrinkle of having Peggy do this underhanded thing that kind of gets Hank to understand his true feelings, but does it in a manipulative way, which makes us ask the question, is it a good thing to make someone sort of realize that they're in the wrong, but doing so in sort of this sneaky way? Let's contrast this against the somewhat artificial ending of Hank's Got the Willies, where all that really happens is that Hank sings an Elvis song, a Buddy Holly song, and all of that smooths over Peggy's anger, even though it doesn't really address the problem of Hank's favoritism towards his guitar. It's just Hank is singing about Peggy, and that puts an end to her hostility. She was about to smash that guitar over his head, but then she hears that he actually cares about her, and that's the end. Okay. It just sort of comes to a rather abrupt conclusion. It's Hank is singing about Peggy, and that makes her realize that he does love her. It's okay, I guess I can kind of see how that connection is, but he still is favoring his guitar in general, and it doesn't really address her sort of underlying insecurity, which I think later season episodes do much better.
Why, thank you, Willie. It sure means a lot coming from you. You know what they say. I'd sell my wife before I'd sell my guitar. Loser! You're a loser!
And speaking of resolutions, I would say that in general, Season 2 has much better conclusions to its conflicts, probably because the problems themselves are so well done. And boy, are there some variety to these issues, my goodness. I mean, we're talking about accidentally selling crack, fighting against a religious zealot and her Planet of the Apes furry friends, going blind from seeing Gary's gyrating ass, stealing historical prosthetics, lying about how you got mono, playing God, treating your boss like a god, and being accused by a global conspiracy known only as the Beast of renting pornography and having your innocence proven by, of all things, the existence of child porn. What the fuck? It's as if the first season gave us the raw materials of the show, and the second season is now subjecting our unrefined product to the intense heat of a forge, defining its edges and strengthening its overall composition. I think that metaphor is apropos, as this is a very hard season in general, one that isn't afraid of diving into the three toughest subjects to talk about: race, religion, and abuse. And I gotta say, these topics specifically provided me with many opportunities for difficulties, because being brought into these kind of conversations is naturally gonna steer our discussion into some rough territories, specifically bringing out some rather, for lack of a better word, interesting takes.
I slept with another man before I met my husband.
before I met my husband.
I definitely spent way more time with these scripts than I did for any of the season 1 episodes, which you could probably tell by the increased video length. That is something that is both a blessing and a curse about these more grandiose and controversial topics. The more complicated these subjects become, the more you kind of have to explain your thought process and validate your opinions, and make sure that you're expressing your feelings in a very understandable and reasonable way. For example, in the Husky Bobby review, if I had just said in that script like, Hank shouldn't have fat-shamed Bobby into giving up his modeling career, what an asshole, then I would have been neglecting a discussion on Hank's history with bullying and how he's attempting to ultimately save Bobby from getting into a world of abuse that the boy is debatably unprepared to face down.
You really think Bobby is special in that way?
Ma'am, for his height, your son is a very special child.
And broadly speaking, it was really difficult to balance my personal opinions, to leave the conversation open to other interpretations, to be sympathetic where I thought it was necessary, and to take stances against things that I disagreed with or found distasteful. Looking back on the season as a whole, I doubt I was very successful in my attempts at creating such a lofty balance, but I'm not really sure how someone could engage with all these really tough subjects without causing some level of cognitive dissonance with some people. The only possible way I could think of navigating these touchy subjects in a non-confrontational or non-judgmental way without upsetting anybody or ruffling any feathers would be to just summarize what the episode is about without giving any of your personal opinions or value judgments about what you like or dislike, just limiting your script to saying stuff like, and here we see Junie Harper says that she thinks that Halloween is bad.
I'm starting to feel like the whole idea of a house of horrors is wrong.
Oh, we could make it a house of pancakes.
By making your videos in that more passive style, you keep the focus on the show and the problems within, rather than on the reviewer or their personal thoughts, and by keeping your head down like that, you get to appeal to a very broad audience because you're not really alienating anybody, you're not really putting out any thoughts that might challenge people, and so you're not really saying anything meaningful or of value. You're just sort of presenting the episode as is, which lets people sort of watch the show without needing a subscription or DVDs, which isn't something that I personally want to do. And I think this is really important to make very clear, I am not afraid of people being upset with me or disagreeing, as that just comes with the territory of discussion, but I know some people out there want me to throw caution to the wind and say, fuck it, here come the hot takes, and you guys just gotta deal with it, bleh. But the thing is, I already kind of do that. I'm not afraid of disagreements, I'm afraid of being misunderstood, which also feeds into the whole video length thing, of course, because if people are gonna, disagree with me, I want them to know, yes, this is my stance definitively, therefore we can have a discussion or a debate on what I just said. That's what I want these videos to do. So if you hear me over-justifying or really digging deep into a subject, I'm not saying so to I'm stepping around on eggshells to make sure I don't upset people. No, I'm crushing those eggshells to make sure that if you're gonna pick those eggshells up, you're really gonna have to dig deep. But even though this has definitely been a very tough season for me to talk about and discuss, it wasn't a hard season for me to watch, at all. And I think that's because the meanness here feels more funny and lighthearted, much less miserable than the later shit that goes on in the final 3 seasons.
I'm glad someone here is making sense.
You think I'm unfair, Hank? Just be glad I'm allowing you contact with Bobby at all.
For example, instead of Bill being a muscle-bound asshole, which is a horribly frightening description to imagine, we get Con pretending that he can't swim.
I thought you said you couldn't swim.
Yeah, a big fat liar!
On top of being more emotionally engaging, the meanness here is usually resolved in very satisfying ways. And I think that's because there's actually repercussions, there's consequences to the bad people and their bad actions. It's not just them stopping what they're doing and going away. I think that's why things like the Dusty Old Bone story feels unfinished, because Caleb just gets told to knock it off, which he does, and then it's over. Really? That's how you're ending the episode? That doesn't balance the scales on how awful he's been. That's not satisfying in any way. That boy needed to get the Andy Maynard treatment, you feel me?
What am I made of? Am I full of sorrow? Am I hurt and pain? Or am I filled with love?
But back here in Season 2, though, we get much more visceral and smile-inducing ends, such as the Arrowhead guy getting pushed into the hole again and again and again and again, Junie Harper gets left to stew in her own godlike juices, Kane Skredeberg stomps on some poop, Leanne gets her ass kicked, and Jimmy Witchard gets his ass kicked. The audience is just given a much greater sense of closure and relief, making the trials and tribulations feel like they've actually been overcome, like they're behind us now, which is a really good feeling. And on top of all of these conflicts and spicy subjects, there's also like a lot of casual violence on display. I mean, let me count the ways here. Junie Harper's cat gets run over, which, by the way, I gotta say, is like the worst part of the whole season. I hate that part. I definitely skip over it whenever I have to rewatch that episode, because it's so, like, unpleasant. Like, poor Joshua, he deserved better, my goodness. That whole like as it runs over him is so awful. Oh god. But besides that, we get Cotton gut punching Hank, Gary gut punching Tilly, Hank getting his clothes ripped off by the tornado, Peggy breaking the ribs of that meat slab, Hank ripping down the Christmas tree, and by far my favorite, the Donut Massacre. In addition to all of these very well done and very well animated conflicts, Season 2 also has 2 court cases. It finally introduces us to the character of Buck Strickland, which is huge. It keeps Cotton as a continuing problem, and it uses the subject of illegal immigration to add a bit more depth to the Con-Hank dynamic. And since I brought up the subject of animation, the show continues to have some really great like skies and sunsets, the one featuring in the Mexico episode being a particularly strong example. Like, I love that. The colors in general are just so good this season, with a lot more vibrancy than we saw from the more washed out style of Season 1. The animation and character models have also taken a very shocking leap in quality too. We've sort of locked into the same art style that we're going to have until the animators move away from traditional cell animation and into computer animation. It's really nice to have hit this consistent and great looking style so early in the series, even if the company man did sneak its way in here and show us the stark contrast between the first 2 seasons of visuals. Ugh.
Well, we don't see you as just another sale, but as a member of our team.
Don't look at me!
I never thought I'd say this, but I don't think I can finish my beer.
But besides all of that, in terms of who came out of this season with the most character development, I would say that Luan is the secret MVP here because she gets 3 huge character moments. The first thing is that she gets the manger babies, which kind of serves as this like replacement for her car aptitude, which is kind of like an interesting weird choice. Like, hey, I don't know, like her knowing about cars, that seems unrealistic. Put her with those god puppets, that's a lot better. Like, I actually really like the manger babies, and I think that they are a good addition to her, but it is sort of weird that they happen at the same time they take away the car stuff. But beyond that, she also gets like her mother's toxic behavior behind her. That's her big second development. And finally, she decides in the end that enough is enough with Buckley and his shitty attitude, and she kicks him to the curb even as he blows up. Luan has already matured a lot from Season 1, showing much more of her own thoughts, desires, and the things that she doesn't want to have in her life. And that's really important because showing a character's boundaries like this can let us know what their core values are, which then allows us to navigate, challenge, and complicate them with new problems and opportunities. As we move into Season 3, she'll begin to explore new romantic interests and what sort of qualities she finds desirable in her potential boyfriends. Which is really good. I'm glad that we're moving away from the pure spectacle of just like crazy things happening and instead letting character motivations drive the plot of these episodes. And even though I've sort of made it sound like Season 2 is primarily comprised of like, big visuals and set pieces and villains and all of that, there is still a lot of really small, great character building stuff in here for us to dig into. I'm thinking primarily of like Hank accepting Gary as a father figure, which is an awe-inspiring way of getting Hank to like move beyond his blindness, and also Luan taking Peggy to the mother-daughter day at the Beauty Academy. Both of those moments are really sweet and really nice to have. On top of those great moments, Season 2 feels a little bit more timeless, as there's not really any big like celebrity moments or showcasing of real life events besides that one Weird Al comment that Hank makes in the Cave episodes and Troy Aikman appearing at the end of that saucy puppet show. Now, if I were going to say who I thought was the biggest winners and the biggest losers of the season, because I'm a little judgmental like that, then I'd have to say that Hank is the obvious winner just in terms of the pure amount of attention that was given to him. Because if we want to get technical here, there are actually 14 episodes this season where Hank is the primary focus character, only 4 where Bobby gets the spotlight, and a meager 2 episodes where Peggy gets to be the star, with the rest of the episodes being a pick and mix bag of other character focus, where the writers seem to say like, how about we make this episode about, let's say, Mo. And in a weird way, I actually think that the guys, Dale, Bill, Boomhauer, all them, are actually the ones who benefited the least from this season. They are still very much just Hank accessories with minimal interactions with Bobby, Peggy, or Luan, and no interactions with anybody else where Hank isn't also there. It's sort of weird. They're very insular characters. They don't really do much or have a life outside of whatever Hank's trying to get them up to do, So it's sort of weird how the writers haven't quite realized the rich storyline potential that the guys have, so they keep them in a small box labeled Hank's Friends, and that's about it, which is really weird when you think about later seasons and how some of the really great episodes of King of the Hill are completely independent of whatever Hank's up to, and we get to see whatever Dale or Bill and sometimes Boomhauer get up to. So it's I don't know, just this really sort of odd product of season 2 where the focus is super on Hank to the point where these other really interesting characters get neglected really hard. They pretty much only act as the peer group that Hank is afraid of upsetting or looking foolish in front of, and at times I would even say they serve as something of a Greek chorus, giving a framework and a reflection to what's going on in Hank's life, just, sort of saying oh, here's a funny joke about what's going on, or why don't you do this, or whatever. They're not really expected to add much to the plot yet, which is really weird considering later seasons, some of the best episodes of King of the Hill period are episodes that focus solely on Dale or Bill, and I guess if you're a person of a certain persuasion, then sure, Boomhauer, whatever. I'm not the biggest Boomhauer fan myself. Dale and Bill are where it's at, but the writers don't seem to have realized that yet, and so in this early season, they're sort of really sort of hammering home Hank, and it sort of comes at the detriment of these other characters, which obviously the writers sort of realize going forward, hey, you know what, we can't just do it about Hank. These other guys seem interesting, so let's dig into them, but that hasn't happened quite yet.
Dale, I've known you since we were in first grade.
You don't know me. I am unknowable.
Other than the guys, Ladybird also continues to be something of a non-presence in the show, if at all, which is really weird if you think about it, as she lives at the Hill House but doesn't really appear in many background shots, which makes it really easy to forget that the Hills even have a pet at all. Oh, and interesting note here, this doesn't have anything to do with anything, but I was thinking about this, and I kind of had this weird eureka moment when I was thinking about Ladybird, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't believe that Cotton and Ladybird have ever had a single interaction in the whole show, which is really strange considering how often Cotton comes over to the Hill House. How would Cotton even react to Ladybird? Is he indifferent? Is he lovey? Does Cotton even like dogs? Does he dislike Ladybird because Hank likes her? I don't know. It's sort of weird that we go 13 seasons of this whole show, and in my memory anyway, I can't think of any notable moments that they share a scene together or a little moment, which is kind of weird. This all leads me to believe that Cotton and Ladybird are in actuality the same person, which really adds a new and perplexing layer to the whole Going Japanese episode. Bravo, Mike Judge, how brilliant.
Don't need her wheelchair no more.
Oh my God, Peggy! What have you done to my wife?
Turned her into a highly trained, highly motivated fighting machine.
But hey, sorry to say, we can't talk about the Going Japanese episode quite yet, as there are still some odd character choices sprinkled throughout Season 2 that I really want to talk about. Bobby, for example, is portrayed as really passive in a lot of these episodes. Aside from his choices in husky Bobby, the boy really doesn't get much say in what he's doing, and even in that moment where he stands up to his dad and says why can't you let me be me? Why do you have to crap on the one thing that seems to be going right in my life and that I'm actually really good at? That stand that he makes against Hank is proven to be wrong in the end. It definitively shows that Hank knows best, so I'm sorry, Bobby, I guess when you let a man take pictures of you, things are naturally just gonna go down the shitter.
Why can't you accept me for who I am?
Yeah, we both saw that after-school special, but I'm not an alcoholic and you're not an ice skater, so let's go.
But it's not fair.
Let's go.
But what is easily the most passive portrayal of Bobby this season comes in The Company Man, where he's cataloging Hank's supposed backstory for his Sunday school report. In general, though, I gotta say, confession time here, Bobby is sort of easy to forget about in the second season, as he's sort of off existing in his own little world, which is normally great, don't get me wrong, I love Bobby's world, he is normally great, and I really enjoy seeing his unique perspective on things, his problem-solving abilities, but very little of that is on display display in the second season, as we're not really like allowed in to join him in his perspective. He's just sort of there doing his own thing. He's definitely still present in the show, don't get me wrong. He's definitely still doing things and has his own thoughts and opinions. It's just that he usually acquiesces to the decisions of other people, making him feel a little lesser than the later season portrayals of him. And the same can be said of the entire Supernussenpone family and Joseph, who are allowed to exist but do so outside of the view of the audience, which is a little disappointing given how interesting they can be when they're allowed their spotlight to shine. And in much the same vein, Bill has yet to reach his truly pathetic or noble state. John Redcorn barely gets to be a one-off gag character per episode, Rusty Shackelford gets introduced in this season, and Principal Moss shows up to, I don't know, be present in the show, I guess. He's a real seat filler of a character, so woo for you.
Mr. Gribble, this is a school. You have to take that cigarette outside.
Yes, sir. Jackass says what?
What?
But I suppose if you were to look at this from a more optimistic or strength-based perspective, then another feather in Season 2's cap is how it is able to effectively drip-feed new characters into the show, and at this point we really aren't sure of who's going to be showing up again and who is a true one-timer. Of course, from our position here in the future, where the show's already been over for 15 fucking Jesus Christing years, God, that kind of hit me a little harder than I was expecting it to. Lordy, lordy, where does the time go? From our position now in the future, where we already know how everything turns out in the end, we are well aware that people like Debbie, Roger Sack, Principal Moss, Jimmy Witchard, the Manger Babies, and Coach Kleehammer all stick around, but from the perspective of someone watching the show for the very first time, it was entirely possible that characters like Junie Harper or Leon would return as Twig Boy did. I mean, think about it. We last saw Twig Boy leaving on a bus for LA in the pilot episode, and then boom, he's back here this next season, so who knows when we'll see him or any of these other characters again. They could show up at any time, anywhere, any place, and that is very interesting. At this point in the show's lifespan, there was an equal chance of dealing with new complications and characters as there were of handling old ones once again. As we move out of Season 2, there's this expectation of more of the same, that we'll see our characters deal with external threats to their existence in the neighborhood, but as the cast grows, as they show more of their personalities in these conflicts, we get to see where the flaws and weaknesses are in their character, allowing problems to come from within, rather than this villain of the week type situation that we've been dealing with for some time now. Compare how we eventually get to see John Redcorn's big meltdown in the Spin the Choice episode, which is his whole accumulation of his fears and frustrations, versus the rather straightforward problem of the Kane Skredeberg thing and his loud music. Ooh, they're causing a lot of noise in the neighborhood. Rrr. Both plot lines are interesting and engaging in their own ways, but as time goes on, the main cast does sort of need to have bigger problems than just, oh, there's this new jerk on the block that I really hate, which is something that the later seasons actually tried to get back into doing. The prime examples being the Dusty Old Bones episode, the Ace and His Jewels, and the Canadians. That whole thing is very sort of antagonistic and ooh, let's see them beat those guys down, yeah. Thinking about it a little bit more, perhaps Season 2 is the practical blueprint for Seasons 10 and above, and also kind of Season 5 too. There's a little bit of that in there too. The later seasons even use these more flat and broad personifications of the characters, almost as if the new writers watched up to the Megalomart explosion and then stopped, and then got kicked in the head and forgot what Peggy's mom looks like. Oops. I don't know, I just have always thought that the later seasons drew from Season 2's conflict-centered style because utilizing the more introspective and risk-taking choices of the middle seasons is actually really hard to pull off well. Because episodes like Pretty Pretty Dresses, Spin the Choice, and Yankee Hanky are big risks for how we see these characters. And I completely understand the fear of that risk, because if these characters change too much, then you risk alienating the audience to the players that they have already come to love over the past 5, 6, 7, 10 years, That's a big ask. In the worst case scenario, the fans may even accuse you of doing quote-unquote character assassinations, but those risks come with the huge potential reward of making old characters feel fresh, as they did with the Beer Can Named Desire episode, where they gave Bill this whole new dimension to his backstory. But hey, if you don't want to take any risks, then just make up a Junie Harper type character, let him be awful for 20 minutes, and just kick the piss out of our cast, hoping, praying to get any kind of laugh out of an uninvested audience. Or hey, if you can't even be bothered to think up new characters to be jerks, just make Bill the antagonizing force, which is a story barrel the writers will eventually return to with tiring frequency. For now though, presenting more surface level conflicts like the tornado or the Buddha sack stuff still feels quite fresh and exciting, as we don't yet know how our characters would respond to these kind of stimuli. And that's really what Season 2 does best. It successfully shows us that there is a lot more to explore in this little show we call King of the Hill. After finishing Season 2, we walk away with a much better understanding of who the Hills are as people, and now we want to see the combinations of character interactions expanded upon.
Peggy, I didn't hire her. She's gone. I'll never see her again.
Except when you close your eyes and kiss me, right? Is that what you're saying?
And just as the show has been benefiting from a lot more depth and nuance, I feel that my videos have been doing much the same. They've definitely gotten a whole lot longer, if nothing else, as I've really been putting in much more effort into the editing and visual jokes than I did in Season 1, which really adds up and means that there's much more time in between video releases, which does bother me quite a bit. The thing is though, my primary goal with reviewing King of the Hill, and really anything that I choose to review in the future, has always been to create a huge library of videos that people can one day binge the crap out of for like a week straight. Which of course means that if I rush out a video because, oh, it's been like 2 weeks, I gotta put out another one, people are hungry for these videos, I gotta really get it out there, and I end up doing a crappy job because I'm rushing on the editing or scripting front, then it'll be crummy forever, and that could potentially break someone out of their binging session. They could go, man, I like those 5 episodes leading to this one, but boy, whew, that one, I could tell he really was just sort of phoning it in, so fuck this guy, bye! If I'm being honest with you, I could probably get a lot more subscribers if I limited the video's length to a maximum of 15 minutes, because then it would only take me like a day or two to get these videos out, and I'd be able to put out the whole series a lot faster, but I'm primarily shooting for viewer satisfaction, not necessarily the broadest appeal I can get. I want the viewers who watch my stuff to really be invested in it, and if people sort of say like, hey, this video is 45 minutes, an hour long, whatever, I'm not going to watch that because of the video length, then that's okay. That's on their, you moderate your own content, you make your own choices, but for the people who stick around, I want to sort of give them something that I can say like, here, I really honestly put out the most effort I could for you, here you go, and if people respond to that, then great. Plus, there's also this other sort of thing that's really understated in my videos that some people probably don't even really notice all that much, but that is the background music. My goodness, putting in the background music takes forever. I just try really, really hard to make the music suit the mood of the video's topic. I don't want cheery music going over a grim subject or vice versa, which all that can sometimes mean up to adding 3 or 4 more hours worth of work time into the whole thing. There have been times where I finish a video and go, phew, all the editing's done. Shit, now I gotta spend all afternoon adding in the music that some people may or may not notice. Hopefully they do, I don't know. But I also have to try to keep my selections varied enough to not create a droning effect where someone binging a lot of the videos will be like, oh my god, he's used the same fucking Zelda track for the last 10 videos. What the hell, dude? I gotta step away from this shit. It's giving me a headache, like, bleh. Oh, and for those of you who want to know, I get 99% of all the music I use from the website OC Remix, which has a lot of beautiful tracks in it, but it also has a lot of stuff that's way too loud or busy for me to use in my videos, because like, it's either metal or it's like people singing, and clearly I don't want to put like, you already gotta listen to me, you don't want to hear like people like going on and on in the background, because it's gonna be like, oh my god, who do I focus on? I can't even think. Specifically, I'd like to shout out one video game series in particular for having the most unusable soundtracks or unusable covers that I have ever heard from anything. I've looked through dozens, if not hundreds of them, and there is not a single damn one that I've been able to use in one of my videos, and that is the Mega Man games. Holy shit, people. If you are a music composer out there and you're thinking to yourself in your cute little head, hey, I'd like to make a little cover of a Mega Man soundtrack, that sounds really fun, I've got good memories of Mega Man, I'd like to make my own little take on it. Here's a little pro tip, fuck you, not everything needs to be a thrash metal cover, Jesus Christ. Every time I click on one of those sound files, it goes da 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 da, and it's like, okay, I guess I won't be using that ever. Delete. yes, other than that, there's 4,000 remixes on OC Remix, and I've sorted through about 1,800, picking only, I'd say, about 70 regulars, so, you know, there's a lot of research that goes into just picking the music, let alone all the editing, scripting, all that other shit. So, yeah, the music selection is pretty time-consuming, but I would say it's worth it. I like it. I can hear it on my good headphones. I think it adds an extra little dimension, so, yeah, I think it makes my videos a little distinct from some of my peers, some of the other people that make videos on this sort of thing, wouldn't you say? I think so, ha ha ha. So anyway, while I've talked a lot about how I could improve my videos, mostly in the scripting department, I'm pretty satisfied with where things are right now. Getting over 10,000 subscribers in under a year feels like quite the accomplishment, especially since I've never actually asked anyone to subscribe in any of these reviews that I do. I thought you guys get that enough in general, so like, and my video's already super long, so why add in the extra like 5 seconds to say, hey, if you like my videos, push the button? You know, you don't need me to pester you about it. You're an adult. I trust you to do what's best for your viewing experience. But anyway, yeah, I'm doing good, the channel's doing good, everything's fine, which I really have to remind myself of sometimes because, I don't know if you know this, but it's pretty easy for content creators to get overly critical of their work and label any videos older than a month as hot garbo, or in the worst cases, you gotta think like, oh man, maybe I should go back and redo some of those old videos, they're kinda shitty, but being too self-deprecating about yourself can really keep you from moving forward. I don't want to just remake season 1 again and again and again until I get it right, you know? So for now, I'll just say that I am really glad and super appreciative of how far we've come so far, but I also still realize that there's room to grow, not just in the numbers, but in also how I produce the videos. But if I were going to try to predict the future of the channel, I personally don't think I'll ever get to 100,000 subscribers. Some people said like, I don't know how you don't have 1 million, and that's because I'm a big goofball who just has like weird opinions, that's why. But I feel like I'm a more like, I don't know, like mid 30,000 kind of subscriber guy, maybe upper 20,000s if I let some people down with some of the like truly classic episodes like A Firefighting We Will Go or Pretty Pretty Dresses. If I do a crappy job on those, some people might go, oh man, you had your one shot and you blew it, meh. Anyway, yeah, I feel like 30,000 subs kind of feels like where I'll cap out, unless I make a video that really pops off in a big way, which I don't really think is going to happen, but I'm really happy with where things are right now, and all the wonderful people who've been watching my stuff and supporting me on this channel already. Big shout out to all my channel members, especially. Those people are super generous and very patient. And I really think that now that we're moving into a season with a bit more breathing room, with a little bit less, you know, teeth-in-throat conflicts, things should become a lot more fun for all of us. We are about to enter into the longest season of the entire series, one that has more episodes than any other, so it'll be a while before we do another one of these retrospect videos. And boy, am I really looking forward to where this channel will be when Season 3 is all done. That'll be like sort of this crazy moment to reflect upon, like, where are things gonna go? What will the channel look like when the Season 3 is all done? How will I have grown? What lessons will I have learned? What sort of new people will I meet? I'm not sure about all that, but it should be really fun to discover. Oh, and please look forward to the next video, as I'll be ranking the episodes from Season 2. I'm not just doing like the top 10 or anything, because I don't think that's very interesting. I'll be doing all of them, all from the bottom of the barrel to the top of the heap, all of that, so that'll be fun. I know some people say, oh, just do top 10, but like, if you just want to see the top 10, just skip to the top 10 in the video. It's all fine. You know, if you don't want to hear the rest of my thoughts, that's okay. Again, you moderate your own content, but yeah, I really want to talk about all of them, because I really like this show. Surprise, surprise. But until then, we can say that this season, as well as my own performance, has indeed been reviewed to death. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.
Your son mocked a beautiful Scottish folk song. We owe it to ourselves to find out why.